Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history for posterity. I'm Cesar Carino, your host, and our guest today for the second time is Jim Brumlow from the hospital. He's the president of our Wadsworth-Rittamn area hospital. We asked Jim to come back today because he didn't finish the last time. And I need to tell you that I want to thank all of the people who called to comment on Jim Brumlow's presentation the last time. I guess we didn't realize what kind of a gem we had in our Wadsworth Hospital. So Jim, I guess you probably ought to know that the people out there want to know more about the hospital, but before we get into the additions to the hospital and some of the personnel and so forth, for the benefit of those people who didn't see the first program, let's tell us a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and all of that kind of thing. You're Jim Brumlow, and we'll spell that for posterity, J-A-M-E-S, James.
Correct.
Middle name?
Walter.
Walter, W-A-L-T-E-R, Brumlow, B-R-U-M-L-O-W. Got
Correct.
that? Is that right?
And I'm a junior.
Junior,
And
okay.
junior.
That's good to know. That's good to know, junior. And tell us a little bit where you were born and how you came to Wadsworth and all of that, and your family.
I was born in Dalton, Georgia. Spent the first 18 years of my life there. Joined the military shortly after I finished high school.
Which was when?
1957.
57.
Spent about 22 years in the Air Force. Air Force was very kind to me in that they sent me to undergrad school, and then they sent me to grad school.
You say 22 years or 22 months?
22 years.
Years, okay.
Years. And finished up my career in Dayton, Ohio at the Air Force Institute of Technology as the executive officer.
What was your rank?
I was a captain.
Captain in the Air Force.
In the Air Force. And met my wife in Dayton.
Then you became the non-commissioned officer after you were married, right?
I became a commissioned officer.
No, I mean after you were married.
Oh, yes, you're right. I became second in command.
Second in command, right.
And then we moved from Dayton.
Tell us who your wife is.
My wife is Judy.
Judy.
She's from Cincinnati.
Judy, what was her maiden name?
Ahlers, A-H-L-E-R-S.
A-H-L-E-R-S.
Correct, she's from Cincinnati. We moved to Sandusky from Dayton and spent about 5 years there, and then moved to Wadsworth in 1986 and have been here ever since.
1986.
Love it.
And we'd hope that you stay here because you have been just a tremendous addition to the hospital. We mourned the death of the previous CEO at that time. Wasn't called president at that time, was he?
He also had the same
president?
title, president as chief executive officer.
They changed that. One time they called it the director of the hospital.
Director, administrator.
Administrator and all of this, and now he's the president of the hospital. And that was Bill Rundle.
Correct.
And you followed Bill Rundle, but there was a little bit of a hiatus there, is that correct?
There was.
Tell us about that. I think that's extremely important for us to...
I was hired to start in June, on June the 2nd of 1986.
And you were in another hospital.
I was at Providence Hospital in Sandusky as
Providence
the
Hospital.
chief operating officer. And Mr. Rundle was to retire on June the 1st.
Right.
Unfortunately, I believe somewhere around the middle of April, I think it was like the 17th of April or somewhere near, had a misfortune of having a massive heart attack.
I had seen him just a couple days before, just a little while before.
And he expired, so there was about a 6-week void between him, his untimely death, and my arriving.
It was just a real pity, just a great person. And one of the units, that is the additions that we're going to be talking about a little later, is named after Bill Rundle. Is that right?
That is correct.
That's right. Now, you're living here in Wadsworth. Where do you live?
I live about 4 blocks from the hospital.
So you can be right there on the
Hidden Valley subdivision.
And I understand that you do, from what some of the people, as a matter of fact, who called were from your hospital itself. And I thought that was really a good sign, because they felt so proud that the hospital was being represented on our program. And they wanted to tell me how much they enjoyed working there. They did not give me names. Well, they did, but I can't give you what their names are. How much they enjoyed working there. And one of the things that they talk about is the fact that it's not unlike you to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning to walk around to say hello to the people and all of that.
Well, I do make a point to occasionally go in for the night shift, for the evening shift. I think it's important that they realize how appreciative we are of the fact that they give up these hours to work these. I have to tell you, I fall asleep usually at 2 o'clock in the morning, regardless of what's happening. But to show how much we appreciate them and their willingness to make the sacrifices to take care of the patients from the Wadsworth area. We really appreciate their efforts.
Jim, you can be assured that those nurses aren't asleep, because they stay up all night long waking patients up. What few times I've been in the hospital has always been, I had pneumonia one time, sound asleep. They wake you up to take your temperature or something like that, but I guess they're supposed to do that. Jim, as we look at that hospital, the hospital is more than bricks and mortar as any organization. Good people, and what percentage would you say live in Wadsworth or around Wadsworth?
I would estimate that 80+%
80+% live
in the
around
Wadsworth-Rittamn area.
And we have then a good number of medical people in our community.
Absolutely.
A good number of medical people in our community, but we think of it only as we thought of it many, many years ago, when there were 3 or 4 nurses. As a matter of fact, some years ago, when Rosa O was on the program, she told about the scarcity of nurses and the scarcity of doctors. Now, we used to be able to count them on one hand and perhaps the first or 2 fingers of the other hand. The doctors were on staff, and the nurses who were on staff. Now we have how many nurses and how many doctors we have?
Physicians, we have about 60 active physicians, that is, that they admit patients to the hospital on a routine basis.
60 of them.
60 of them. We have another 50 or so who are on courtesy staff.
And what does that mean?
That means that they admit less than 12 patients a year.
Oh, I see.
Although they can have any number of outpatient encounters. It's a classification. And then we have probably another 30 or 40 who are what we call consulting. They don't admit patients. They're specialists. They come in and consult with our attendings and provide
heart doctors and things like that.
No, the heart doctors, the cardiologists are actually on active or courtesy staff.
They're on active, okay.
Consultant would be someone like a physician who specializes in therapeutic radiology.
Ah, okay.
With the big linear accelerators, those kind of individuals. An infectious disease person, for example, who simply says, here's the type of drugs that you would provide for this patient. Those are probably classic examples.
When your paymaster sends out those checks every week or every other week or whatever it was, how many does he have to send out?
We send out about 400 every other week.
400.
400 employees.
400. You know, it's almost impossible for those of us who were born in Wadsworth, to fathom that a little Wadsworth-Rittamn hospital is not a little Wadsworth-Rittamn hospital. It's a huge hospital as compared to what we had many years ago. I can still remember that the hospital would take on about 30 or 40 people, you know, in the beds down there, and they're all hang-cranked. And there was an old stable. That's what it was. The old hospital started in 1921, and the first 2 people born there, my understanding is, were Harriet Crawford and Bob Clapper. Bob Clapper is now gone. He moved to Worcester. His mother was Marie. Mercy, let's see here, Marie Simmons from Western Star. And she married Lloyd Clapper, and then Bob Clapper was born then in 1922, right shortly after the hospital was opened. And when our own son, to show you how big this is, and I just thought I'll ask the question first, and then I'll make the comparison. How many children are born, and what's the largest number of children ever born in one day?
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you have any idea? Is it 1, 2, 3, 5, 10?
I have no idea.
Well,
I know that when the births were higher back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, the obstetrical service was much larger. Now with smaller families, it's gone down considerably.
When our son was born in 1963, that night, he was born in October 2nd, October 3rd, I'm sorry, October 3rd. And when he was born, 5 babies were born that night. It was so outstanding that the doctors were running up and down. And of course, we had 2 very, very wonderful Greek doctors here. One was Dr. Lycus and the other was Dr. Pappas. And most beloved people in Wadsworth. And they were scurrying about, and we overheard one of them say, "It's the full moon, it's the full moon." However, there was one of our American doctors who said, "Full moon, hell, just some damn wild New Year's Eve parties," is what it was. So that would have worked that out. We have also a corps of volunteers in addition to the 400 paid. How many volunteers do you have? And tell us a little bit about that volunteer service and who some of the people are.
Well, let's begin with the Red Cross volunteers.
Okay, Red Cross volunteers.
Who do several things for us. They staff the information desk. They deliver flowers. They deliver mail. They act as transporters to take samples, pick up records from our emergency room. Just do a wonderful job at it. Probably the one that stands out most in my mind is Gertrude Nellis.
Gertrude Nellis. She's been there for a long time, and if I tell you how many years it is, she'll shoot me.
But she's probably been there at least 40 years, conservatively.
Conservatively.
And so there's probably, I'm going to say, 40 to 50 Red Cross volunteers who are there at various times throughout the week.
How are they organized? How do they, I mean, you just walk in, I want to be a volunteer, or do they have an organization? What is it?
No, they have to apply with the Red Cross. They go through a training period with the Red Cross agency, and then the Red Cross agency places them at the hospital, and of course they have a mentor, so to speak, when they first come in, who says, here's what we do and here's how we do it, and then they become what we call a regular at the hospital. We see those same faces over and over again, which is very nice.
And they don't get any pay.
They don't get any pay.
No privileges.
No privileges.
No parking spaces.
No parking spaces.
Nothing.
But I think they have the joy of volunteering. It's a heartfelt thing that they do. The rewards are intangible, not tangible. That's
absolutely true. I come to the hospital frequently to see friends who are in the hospital, and I still have this puerile fear of some of these wonderful volunteers, because they are the guards there at the door, and no one goes through if there are too many people up on the upper floor and so forth. And I always try to sneak by them if I possibly can, but we do realize that they do a wonderful job. Now, you said that we will start with the Red Cross volunteers. Are there other kinds of volunteers as well?
There's the hospital auxiliary.
And what is that? How does that function?
Well, the hospital auxiliary is organized as a part of the hospital, so to speak. It has its own bylaws, has its own rules and regulations, is self-governed, and they do a lot of other things as well, such as run the gift shop, run the snack bar. They transport patients being discharged. They serve as the surgical liaison, which is a service we started about 4 years ago or so, where
describe that a little bit. Surgical liaison. Surgical
liaison person is out in the lobby.
Okay.
And she is in contact with surgery, so that if someone has a question about their relative or friend who's in surgery, they ask her. She calls back and says, "What's the status?" Well, they're still in surgery. It'll be another hour, another 30 minutes. They're in recovery. They'll be on the floor in 30 minutes, and you can go up and see them, that kind of thing. So she's the communicator between surgery and the families.
And you started that 4 years ago?
About 4 years ago.
Now, is that something that you initiated?
We initiated in conjunction with the auxiliary.
I see. Okay.
We thought it was a good idea, and they embraced it, and they staff it.
And how many auxiliary members do you have?
Probably have about 120 or so.
Wow, where do they come from?
All over.
Are they Wadsworth residents or Rittamn?
Primarily Wadsworth and Rittamn.
And who, you said they have an organization?
They have their own organization, elect their own officers.
Oh, my.
And
Who's the president, the present president?
you would ask me that.
Well, if you think of it.
Yeah, it slips my mind at this point.
Now, transporting patients back and forth, you mean in wheelchairs and discharging them and things
And
of this
discharge
nature?
them right.
And what other kinds of volunteers do you have then?
Those are basically our volunteers, although we do have some students who come through on rotations. For example, physical therapy. We have some occasional there's really students in training and who have to do rotations at clinical rotations at hospitals.
And what about the little girls that candy stripers, whatever they are?
We don't have candy stripers.
You don't have
anymore.
candy
No,
stripers?
I think that went out in the early 80s.
I see.
It was a function of not enough volunteers and not enough adults who were willing to commit the time to it. So.
I see. We are going to run out of time as we did the last time, so why don't we get into the first edition and what prompted it, what motivated the need for the edition, and then some of the problems that came with the edition. I mean, there's no way that a hospital which is dependent upon other people paying you money, you don't sell anything, you don't make any money, or you're not supposed to be making any money. How did you get that money, and how hard was it, and who did it, and all of those other kinds of things? As a matter of fact, we are very much saddened again that one of those original people who helped formulate the entire hospital is now gone. I mean, you might have mentioned that and who he was,
Yes.
what he did.
Yes, Carl Bradford was one of the guiding lights of the new hospital.
We'll spell that B-R-A-D-F-O-R-D,
Correct.
Carl, C-A-R-L,
Correct.
from Rittamn. Is an attorney.
He's an attorney, was an attorney in Rittamn.
Tell us a little bit about Carl.
Carl was one of those individuals whose vision was about 10 light years ahead of everybody else. And he's the one who really, along with about 8 or 9 others, created the concept of a joint district hospital, which would be underwritten by the 2 communities of Wadsworth and Rittamn. And actually had to go to the state to get legislation to allow that to happen, which Carl did.
Do you remember with which legislators he worked?
I do not. I would, based on my knowledge, I'm not sure who the state representative or the state senator was in the early 60s.
Well,
My guess
that'd be
would,
Batchelder.
I was going to guess it would be Batchelder.
He has been a state representative forever. And as I remember, the one from Wayne County was a fellow by the name of, he lived in Oroville, south of the city and on the east side of the road. And I just can't think of his name right now, but I think he was also involved with the legislation of it.
But they created a hospital, and they created under a concept which allowed the hospital to be self-supporting from day one. And that was how the hospital was to be funded. 1/3 from Hill-Burton funds, which was a government program, grant. 1/3 from a levy that was underwritten by Wadsworth, Rittamn, and Milton and Wadsworth townships, and 1/3 from private donations. They were very successful, and it was oversubscribed, and so there was money left over when the hospital opened in 1970, which allowed it to do the kind of things that it has done throughout the years in terms of growth. In addition, over the years, we've had some pretty substantial donations by various individuals, which we've put in trust and used that for growth opportunities as well.
Are you at liberty to say who those people were and how much they gave? Or if you're not, that's all right.
The one that I particularly recall is Dr. Shong.
Spell that C-H-O-N-G?
S-H-O-N-G.
S-H-O-N-G, okay.
Dr. Shong was a family practitioner in Rittamn for many years, retired in 1970. And, I'm sorry, 1957 he retired. He died in 1970. But he retired in 57. Dr. Borelli took his practice.
Right, okay.
You may recall Dr. Borelli, who retired a few
Right
years
on
ago.
Main Street on the west side of the road,
That's
about
correct.
a block or so south of the square of Rittamn.
But Dr. Shong left, at his death in 1970, left about $500,000 to
Wow.
the hospital. And in his will, he created a trust for his wife. They had no children. He created a trust for his wife with a stipulation that when she died, that anything left in the trust would go to the hospital as well. She died in, I believe it was 1991, and there was still well over $400,000 left in that trust
So you got almost $1 million there.
from Dr. Shong. Those are the ones that have occurred since I've been here. And that's why I'm aware of that one. But there have been other substantial donations as well. And all of that has gone into a trust fund that we use to build. We also fund our depreciation each year, which means that it's an expense on the books, but it's used to replace equipment and buildings as the need arises. And so through the depreciation and the donations, we've been able to do these kind of things without incurring any debt.
That's wonderful. Who are some of the people now making the decisions at the hospital?
Some of the current board, we have Tony Solero.
Tony
who's
Solero.
from LOMED, whose wife Sandy is also the school board.
Right.
You have Dan Sondels. You have, well, there's 14. We recently changed. We have 3 physicians on the board as well. John McCandless is a board member, as a physician, Larry Spalgeric, and Mike Bianco, those 3. We also have a couple of vacancies due to Carl Bradford's death.
Right. Now, would you have to get that vacancy filled from Rittamn since it was a Rittamn person?
We will, because the structure of the board is such that 6 members are appointed by the association, 2 members are appointed by Wadsworth City, 1 is appointed by Wadsworth Township, 1 by Milton Township, and 1 by the City of Rittamn. That goes back to the structure that was created in 1970 so that we could sell the bonds
Surely.
to underwrite the construction of the hospital. So,
Who's the president of the board at the present time?
Tony Solero is the
Tony's
president.
the president.
Correct.
I think absolutely excellent one. We had him on our program not too long ago. Tony's an upstanding member of the community and also a very bright, very
Absolutely.
scholarly person. Jim, the first edition came how many years after the hospital opened?
First edition was 7 years after the hospital opened, and it was used to create additional space in the laboratory and the X-ray.
Geographically, where was that? Northwest?
West.
Northwest side. Okay.
Correct. And just at the front entrance.
And then that was adjacent, so that we have a little bit of a, if people don't understand the cardinal directions, next to the physician's parking lot, or close to it.
That was the second edition.
Oh, okay. Where was the first one then?
Well, the first one was X-ray lab and along the front.
Okay.
The second edition was in 1983. That was to enlarge physical therapy, create some new administrative space, and create a new emergency room, which became known as the Rundle Center at that time, and that was a project that I was not involved in, because it was before my time. But if you look back in history and look at the emergency room at the time, in the early 80s, I'm told it was 2 rooms, 2 small rooms next to surgery.
Correct. That is correct.
And at the time, that new emergency room that was created in 1983 was deemed to be the end-all and be-all of all emergency rooms.
Even though the only separation between you and the person next to you was a sheet?
That's correct. That was one of the design things that we found later on. It wasn't a real issue, I don't believe, in the early 80s because of the volume. But as the volume in the emergency room grew, it became obvious that the emergency room constructed in 1983 was inadequate.
Right off the bat.
Right off the bat.
Not too many years later, we found out that it was not adequate.
14 years later, it was replaced.
We have a beautiful emergency room now,
Yes.
and that probably one of these days will go by way of the other ones, saying that it's not adequate, but right now it's in fine shape.
Actually, we built that one that can be expanded.
It can be expanded.
Can be expanded.
And we built it with real walls.
Yes.
With real walls, so that you don't hear the other person's ailments.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at emergency rooms and look at ours. If you look at some of the emergency rooms that are being built as we speak, there'll be a new one opening at Akron City this month. There's a new one opening in Robinson early next year.
Ravenna.
In Ravenna early next year. And you see the write-ups on these emergency rooms, and you look at everything that we did.
They're
being duplicated at these other locations.
Wadsworth took the lead then.
Wadsworth took the lead. In fact, the way we constructed those treatment rooms with the sliding glass doors required a variance from the state.
Really? Why?
Well, they said that due to the fire codes, that you need a door closure on all of those. And we said that we didn't think this was correct, that if you put a door closure on there, you would effectively seal the patient in and have to enter a closed door. And so we asked for a variance from the state, and the state, in looking at what the state of the art was and what it should be down the road.
Don't tell me they changed.
They agreed with us and
okay.
said you don't need door closures on there, and eliminated that requirement. And now everybody's putting those kind of rooms in.
Those kinds of rooms in.
Correct.
Oh, that is interesting. That is really interesting. The fact that the large urban hospitals are following the lead of our little hospital here in Wadsworth.
We put an X-ray unit in the emergency room. They're doing exactly the same thing, so that the patient doesn't leave the emergency room for their care unless they need a highly specialized X-ray.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because I remember in the old emergency room, we would be sitting in the waiting room, and people would be coming right through the waiting room, bleeding or whatever, and going into, and everyone is embarrassed about the whole thing. There's no modesty in the hospital, but you certainly don't want to be immodest in the waiting room. Jim, what were some of the problems that came? Now, you said that you had money. That was no problem there. Self-supporting. I don't want to give the illusion that you have extra money.
That's correct.
Because you don't have any extra money. Just you had enough money. What were some of the problems, however, that you ran into? You identified one that you had to well, not combat necessarily, but you had to interact with the state for the variances. What about, were there any problems that the city gave you? Were there any problems that the townships gave you? Did people object to anything?
No. I have to say that the relationship with the community and the hospital is excellent, whether it be with the community members and residents themselves, or whether it be with the cities. They're just excellent. We get such fantastic support from the Wadsworth City that it just boggles my mind.
Well, that's good to hear.
I can recall one day that a transformers used to be up on the poles at the hospital. And I can remember one day that a transformer went out. And I can remember Pete Giacomo bringing everybody that he could find from the electric department down to fix that transformer so that we got back up and running. I mean, it was just amazing to see the trucks and the people out there in such a short period of time, and them fixing that and getting it done, and us back into service. Now, we have an emergency power generator, which allows us to continue to function, but we don't have all the power you need to do everything that you need to do.
Of course not. You know, talking about the generation of electricity and so forth, everyone's talking about Y2K. Of course, that's for the benefit of historians 20 years from now who may not know what Y2K means. It's the concern that we have of what's going to happen to computers at the turn of the century because of the fact that all of the computers are dedicated to the 1900s and not to the 2000s. And I'm not trying to be patronizing here to you, but I need to explain that so that people hearing this maybe 50 years from now would not know what Y2K meant. Anyway, is there a concern at the hospital with Y2K, and what are you doing about it?
Well, there absolutely is.
There is.
We have, our main computer system is now 2000 compatible. We've upgraded it and used the technology to make sure that the main system works. However, we have about 500 to 600 pieces of equipment that work off computers, computer chips, have computer chips embedded. And we have to check out to make sure that those are 2000 compatible. I mean, you don't want to be running a test and your equipment go out. So we're in the process of doing that. Our plan is to have that done by about May. We've already identified close to $200,000 worth of equipment that has to be replaced because it's not year 2000 compatible.
You anticipated my question. Is it expensive?
Yes,
Yep.
it is.
It's expensive.
And we still haven't checked out all of the equipment. The reason we haven't checked out all the equipment is because the manufacturers still are not saying yes it is or no it is not. We anticipate that number is going to grow substantially as we get into the year.
Jim, you're being very humble. My understanding is from being involved with Y2K, not that I know anything about it, understand that. I don't really know anything about Y2K, but I'm trying to learn as much as I can. And I don't know why particularly, because I don't even, well, I have a little computer, but if it goes out for 3 months, it wouldn't make any difference to me. But my understanding is that you are taking a leadership role in helping other hospitals also with our Y2K problems. Is that true?
True to a certain extent, yes. We're sharing information with them as we find it. Conversely, they're sharing information with us as well. But I've also been active in some of the seminars and programs, and in fact, there's one coming up later this month that's county-wide, sponsored by the Chambers of Commerce.
And you're presenting.
I'm a panel member. That's
You're
correct.
a panel member of that. I had read and heard that you were involved with this because of your problem. So once again, not only emergency rooms are they following, but they're looking to people like Jim Brumlow for guidance in terms of the computerization as well. We want to come back to the additions, but I need to ask a question right here. You've been here 5 years now, right?
12 years. 1986.
Oh, 86, okay,
86.
all right, I'm sorry, I was thinking of the day, 92. 86, you've been here 12 years. What changes have you seen I'm going to give it 3 different dimensions. 1 in hospital administration, 2 in personnel, and 3 in government interventions that have confused issues in hospital work?
Well, I think all of those are intertwined. Probably the biggest change that we've seen in administration is directly related to government. Government has such a regulatory mindset that we're constantly faced with new laws and new regulations every day of our lives. If there's a regulation or a law that applies to a general business, it applies to hospitals. And we have our own set that apply only to us. We're probably the most regulated industry in the country.
That's what I was thinking that you might say something like that. Let's just take one. You actually had to work through, and devise plans to get through the whole AIDS treatment program. You remember that?
Yes, I do remember that, except that we're very fortunate in Medina County that we had very few of those cases and didn't really have to deal with it in depth like some of the big city hospitals have. But yes, I mean, we had to develop protocols and procedures and practices to deal with those kinds of things. But we've also done the same thing with hepatitis. which can be blood transmitted. You know, we've done a lot of those kind of things over the years. But regulation in terms of just how we operate, who reviews us. We have reviews by outside agencies, peer review agencies,
How do we
quality
fare?
of care. We always fare very well. Joint Commission is another one that comes in and reviews us. The Health Department, either at the local level for our food service activities or the state level for some of the things that we did under Certificate of Need laws, which are now no longer on the books. But we get involved in almost every aspect of government in dealing with issues at the hospital.
Do you do this by yourself? Or do you have?
No, without question. There is no way that I could do that alone. We have a complement of employees that really take the lead in handling those kind of things, and they allow me to do the fun things like come down and talk to you.
No, I'm glad they let you do that. Jim, let's go back then to the additions. The one edition, the last edition, let's hit that one before we go any farther. The last edition, and what did that do, and what did that do for the residents of Wadsworth?
Well, the last edition was, of course, the emergency.
I'm sorry. Before the emergency, the one previous to that one.
The one previous to that one was the addition, which created medical offices on the campus. It's a 3-story addition. First floor we used for the hospital activities. We expanded X-ray. We expanded our outpatient department, our endoscopy suite, those kind of things on the first floor. Second and third floor was devoted to medical offices.
Right, and that's one that I wanted to talk about just for a moment here. Tell us about those medical offices and how that impacted upon the residents of Wadsworth and how it has streamlined the the curative rate.
Well, I think it allows access on a much easier basis.
Oh, boy.
The physicians are at the hospital. They need a test. The patient comes down to the hospital, gets the test. The patient information for that test result is communicated back to the physician on a very short notice for the most part, and care gets rendered in a very expeditious manner. In the past, when the offices were located away from the hospital, the patient had to leave the office, come to the hospital, get the test, then perhaps go back to the physician's office. Now they're all in the same building.
Now, what about
they never go outside.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What about the physicians themselves? Let's say, for instance, you have an extraordinary emergency.
Well, in an emergency situation, when they were located away from the hospital, they effectively closed their practice for an hour and a half to deal with that, because they'd have to come to the hospital, take care of the problem, and then go back to the office, which meant that patients were sitting in their lobby waiting for them to come back. Now they do that in 10 to 15 minutes, and the patients don't have to wait that hour and a half for them to take care of it, because
drop downstairs and there they are.
Drop downstairs and go see the patient and come back.
How many doctors do we have on floors 2 and 3 of the hospital?
Oh, I'm going to say
50, 60?
No, probably about 25.
25?
About
Okay.
25.
It just seems like you see a lot of names.
Well, and I was trying to remember how counting those names, and
No.
I can't do it, but I'd say about 25 total.
And then, not too far from the hospital, across the road from the hospital, is another medical center, is there not?
There's a medical office building on Leatherman Road, which is directly across the emergency room. You may be aware that we bought that building in July.
No, I was not aware.
We bought that building in July. We're in the process of getting some architectural and design work done. We expect to go out to bid probably in about 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to do a lot of work on the interior of that building, and we're also going to increase its size. And we'll have some primary care physicians in there when that project is complete, in addition to the one internist that we have in there now.
Is there any thought about putting a walkway or tunnel or something like that?
No, we have not. I mean, the primary care are pretty much outpatient based, and of course they send people to the hospital, but their parking lot is adjacent to the emergency room parking lot, so it's very easy to get in and out.
Right, in and out, right. And how many other doctors do we have in Wadsworth who are not in those two facilities?
I'd say probably another 15 or so.
10 or 15? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. The one thing that years ago, I can still remember this way back in the 30s and 40s, one doctor, at least Dr. N.J.M. Klotz, had a, well, probably an Albatross now, but it was an x-ray machine right in his office. I think that probably the hospital had one too, I'm not really positive. That doesn't happen anymore. Tell us about the innovative equipment that Wadsworth Hospital has now, which probably does not necessarily excel what we have in the larger hospitals, but meets those recommended heights. What would they be?
Well, let's take X-ray, which is probably a good example. The traditional X-ray unit is almost a thing of the past now, because we use CT scans, we use ultrasound, we use nuclear medicine, where the old fluoroscopy units with the routine diagnostic testing was king 10, 15 years ago. That's become a very small part of the radiology business.
You don't have to drink that horrible stuff anymore? And
no, in fact, for the most part, if that occurs, for example, with a CT exam or nuclear medicine, those are injected. Injected. And so we see a tremendous change in that area. But we put a CT in, a fixed CT in 1990. We just replaced that in January. 7 years old, we replaced it because of the upgrades in technology.
Did you get a rebate?
No, we really didn't.
You don't get those with green stamps either,
no,
do you?
you really don't. When it's obsolete, it's obsolete.
It's obsolete, it's just junked.
And pretty much. The manufacturer takes it out for us is about the only thing we can say about it. But ultrasound, when I came here in 1986, we had one ultrasound unit. We now have 4 ultrasound units, which are dedicated to specific body parts. For example, we have one that does strictly echocardiograms, which is views of the heart. Mm-hmm. We have another one which is primarily OB. And we have 2 that are kind of routine diagnostic ultrasounds. Nuclear medicine, we put a nuclear medicine camera in 1994. And that's proved to be another type of X-ray procedure, that modality that's just boomed in terms of its usage.
Now, what is nuclear medicine? I don't think I understand.
Well, that's you inject radioactive material.
Okay.
And then it goes to different body parts, and you measure the activity at that body part.
Okay.
And it comes out on a nice little film, and you can diagnose disease from those films. Mm-hmm. We're in the process at the present time of developing a fixed MRI unit. We have a mobile now. Probably about May or so, we're going to have a fixed unit there, which is available 7 days a week to our community. Not a small investment, but an investment that we think is good for the community.
What, you don't buy those at Kmart? How much do they cost?
About $1,100,000.
Wow.
Plus a special room to house them in.
Plus a special room?
Yes.
Now, do they run on electricity? Do you have to have special electricity for it?
It's electricity. It takes a lot of electricity because it's a big magnet. You can't put routine nails that you put in your home, mm-hmm. or even in other places in the hospital, in the room that houses it, because the magnet will just pull them out of the wall.
You're kidding?
No, you have to use special nails, special shielding.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
And so that'll be available probably around the May time frame as we make the addition and purchase that equipment. Lab, another good example.
What is that?
Laboratory. We've put in all kind of new technological advances in terms of doing complete blood counts, color counters, state-of-the-art, dimension chemistry analyzers, where they run multiple tests all at the same time on the same sample of blood. I mean, we can just go down the list. Surgery. When I came here in 1986, surgery didn't have lasers. We have lasers in surgery now.
We have lasers?
We have
and they use them?
And they use them in surgery. That's correct. So the technology changes almost overnight.
As I hear you talking, what is your degree in, just out of curiosity?
My undergraduate degree is in business.
In business. Well, you have a graduate degree in business.
No, I have an undergraduate degree in business.
Oh, an undergraduate degree in business, and a graduate degree in?
I have a master's of healthcare administration.
Healthcare administration. You have, through osmosis, a master's in medicine, a master's in electrical engineering, and you have to be absolutely everything.
No, I have a lot of people who are everything.
Who are some of the people who help on these kinds of things?
Well, I mean, we have two vice presidents. One is our chief financial officer, vice president of finance, who's Bill Ullman. We have Carolyn Lachlan, who is our vice president of patient care. We have two senior directors, who are Marilyn Haskins for human resources and Lyndall Peebles for patient care. We have, and I won't try to name all of them, although I can.
No, I'll bet you can.
But we have 23 department directors. We have 23 departments in the hospital.
23 departments?
23 departments.
Could you name some of them?
Laboratory, X-ray, emergency room, occupational health, education outreach, risk management, quality assurance and utilization review, pharmacy. We can just go down the list. I mean, housekeeping. I will tell you something about our housekeeping department. It reminds me. The one comment that is always consistently high from patients.
Cleanest hospital in the area.
Cleanest hospital I've ever seen. And those ladies do a tremendous job.
They do. They do a nice job, a very, very nice
Everybody
job.
does a tremendous job, but they get singled out because there's something there that people can compare.
I went to a neighboring hospital to see a relative of mine in June. I could not believe that in the corners there was crud, well, probably only an eighth of an inch high. It looked like a mile high, you know. And I was reminded, as a matter of fact, my wife, Linda, said, look at that. You've never seen that in Wadsworth Hospital, never. No one wants to go to the hospital. Well, if you have to go to the hospital, you want to go to a clean hospital.
Correct.
And that is extremely important. You know, one time I was down there and I said to this one lady who had come in with something, said, "Are you a nurse?" She says, "No, I'm just a cleaning lady." I said, "No, you cannot say you're just a cleaning lady." So that's the main reason that most people come here, because it is so clean. So, you know, it's good that you pointed that out. Jim, we talked about the mobile units. I remember some years ago when all the MIRs and all these other, and I don't know if I know the right names for them, were all in a truck. Who owns those? I mean, where'd they come from?
Those were really, they really flowed from the Certificate of Need laws in the state of Ohio.
Now explain that, if you will,
Well,
please.
the Certificate of Need law was administered by the Ohio Department of Health. And what that said is, if you don't have a certain volume, you can't have this kind of equipment.
In other words, the Department of Health tells you what you can and cannot have in your...
At that time, they could.
Wow.
And so the companies, someone had a bright idea. Well, if I put one of these in a truck and take it to all of these places that they want to prove these units, I can develop a pretty good business. And they were right. And so they would contract with, they'd put a unit in a trailer, pull it between hospitals, and they developed a pretty good business. CT was the first one of those that we saw. And of course, as we built the volume at the hospital, we saw that we should have one of our own. We convinced the state of that under the Certificate of Need, and they allowed us to put one in 1990. MRI is another one that's currently being utilized out of trailers at a lot of hospitals.
And we're getting our own.
We're converting ours out early next year. But that's how they developed, was because of Certificate of Need laws.
The regulatory agencies, city, county, state, federal, are there any international ones?
I don't think so. I don't know of any.
You have enough to do with those other ones. As we talk about the volunteers a little while ago, you mentioned Gertrude Nellis. And I will not give her age, even though I don't know it, but maybe I do, but I'm not going to give her age because she will shoot me. Who are some of the other old-timers that...
Well, we have, in the auxiliary, we have individuals like Theora Mackin.
Theora Mackin, right? Oh, my, yes, right.
Roberta Kaler. Thelma Whitman.
Thelma Whitman, yes. These are all old-timers from... And they've been there for years and years and years.
They've been involved with the hospital for 20 to 30 to 40 years. And such a wonderful group of people.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, they always do everything with a smile on their face. They do it in such a compassionate way, the way they deal with people. I'm always amazed that I say, you know, you're one of our most valuable resources. The way you interact with our patients and the way you support the patient, the hospital, out in the community. And that goes for all of our employees. I mean, they all do the same thing. They're all out there supporting the hospital. You know, we have 400 of the finest employees that you're going to find anywhere.
Well, that's good to hear. They're taking care of our good health.
And you layer onto that 150 medical staff members and about 200 volunteers, you're getting up to about 750 people.
750 people keep us well in this country.
Who are involved in the hospital.
We have an emergency. We have a huge crash. Who presses the button?
Depends on the situation and the time of the day. If it's during the day, I would. If it's at night, we have what we call an administrator on call. That's the first contact, and they decide we're going to call everybody in. And we have disaster drills. We have to have 2 per year.
Like fire drills in a school?
No, not fire drills.
No?
These are mass casualty disaster drills where,
right.
In fact, we just had one last week. We had a simulated collapse of the stands down at the football stadium and brought in about 18 victims or patients, if you will, from that scene in conjunction with the EMS, local EMS, and other EMS units from around the area. Involved in that exercise. So we do that twice a year. Now, fire drills, we have to have 1 per quarter for every shift in the hospital.
1 per quarter for every shift in the hospital. Now, what do you do with the patients during those times?
We sound the alarms. We don't move the patients. I mean, that's something we don't want to do, is disturb the patients. But everybody knows when a fire alarm goes off, and we try to keep the bells down to a minimum so as not to disturb them. We really run the bells about 20 seconds or so. But everybody knows that it's a fire drill, and they close the doors and
they know what to do. And
do the
in other words,
things, right.
Getting out of the building themselves is not so important as doing what to do with the patients.
With the patients, right.
That's something that we would never think of probably, but you know that those things do happen. The excuse me, pardon me. The disaster drill that you had a couple of weeks ago with the well, I guess the stands collapsing in a football game or something like that. I'm reminded that on November 22nd, 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated, that the hospital in Texas, where he was taken, Parkland, I think it was Parkland Hospital, was it not?
Yes, Parkland
Hospital.
In Dallas.
That after the whole thing was over, they had never really practiced for that kind. Now, obviously, you can't. You probably don't have something in place for if a president comes through Wadsworth and he gets assassinated. But is there an omnibus kind of disaster protocol for the unusual? Let's say, for instance, that a plane crashes in the middle of the city. Do you have an omnibus protocol, I should say, protocol for the emergency that would be an emergency in itself?
Yes, we do. We have a disaster plan that we implement and put into effect. It's the same plan that we exercise twice each year. And it depends on the magnitude of the event as to what we really do in terms of implementing the plan. In other words, if it's a full-blown disaster where we think that we need everybody that works at the hospital, we implement a total recall, and we'll bring 400 people in there.
And you do that. You blow the whistle.
Right.
You blow the whistle.
At that point, they're all coming in. If we determine, and we would at some point in time determine, well, we only need 200 people, we'll send the other remainder home, but they will be on call to come back as we need them or to change shifts or that kind of thing.
And what is your role in this?
I'm what's called the command center.
Command center.
So that all the information flows through that command center.
And what is the role of the guy who picks up papers on the grounds?
Probably security, to make sure that we really seal off the hospital so that we don't allow people in. We'll obviously allow some families in and take care of them, but we keep them in one location so that we know how to deal with them and know where to find them. But that individual would be security for the most part.
Now, what happens if someone, during that emergency, that a heart attack patient comes, do you send him to another hospital?
Depends on what's going on. I mean, if we have the capability to take care of that patient in addition to what we're doing at the present time, we would. If we did not, we might divert some vehicles.
Right. Now, do you have any kind of mutual aid pacts with any other hospitals in case there's a huge, God forbid, I mean, 1,000 people might get hurt or something?
Oh, absolutely. All of the hospitals in the area work together.
They do work together.
Have a mutual aid agreement whereby we can send patients to various hospitals in the different area.
Going back to the 4 additions, name them in succession, and then I want to ask one question about them. The first one was the
77 additions.
77, which was?
Lab X-ray.
Lab X-ray. The second one was?
83, which was the emergency room.
Emergency Rundle Center.
Rundle Center, some administration and physical therapy.
Third?
Third was the medical office building in 1990, and then 97 was the emergency room.
Okay, now, with all of those things, we went through I should say, a tremendous change in technology via communication. When the old hospital was down on Garfield Street, they had one telephone, a candlestick telephone, on the desk of the head nurse. What did the influx of all of these brand new things do in terms of your communication systems? Well,
we have currently 50-something lines and 300 phone numbers. You can access any area in the hospital directly if you're aware of that number. For example, physicians' offices calling the lab don't go through the switchboard. They call the lab direct. People can call any office in the hospital direct if they have access to that number. But we had probably, when I arrived here, probably on the range of about 25 lines and 25 numbers.
And now you have?
Now we have 50, I believe it's 58 lines and 300 numbers.
300 numbers. What about telephones in the rooms?
There's a telephone in every room.
Every room.
It's one of those 300 that you can dial direct.
You can dial directly to the room if you know the number.
Directly to the room now.
If you know exactly the number.
If you know the room number,
right.
Correct.
That has come such a long way. I mean, it doesn't seem like a big thing perhaps, but when you're in that hospital, that telephone is extremely important to you, getting messages in and out. Jim, we're going to run out of time again, but we have 2 more questions we have to ask you about the administration of the hospital. You are the chief and you're the president and all of that. God forbid something happens to you. Do you have a protocol by which the next person in line, say for instance that a terrorist came and said, I'm going to take Jim Brumlow out of commission because he's the guy who presses the button and so forth. do you have someone who knows exactly what you do?
Yes, there's an administrator on call who would just pick up the ball and run with it. And then, of course, we have the two vice presidents who would
They know exactly what to do.
exactly what to do.
In
on
other
a
words, you aren't
day-to-day
the only one
basis.
who knows how to blow the whistle.
No.
Okay,
No,
that's one question.
I'm really not.
The other question that
In
I
fact,
have.
they probably know how to blow the whistle better than I do.
The other question that I have is related to that somewhat. What is their responsibility when you're there? I mean, when you have these emergencies, what is their responsibility?
They're still in charge, as always, in charge of the daily operation of the hospital.
Okay.
In their departments that they manage, those 4 people.
In other words, if something happens during the day and you're there, you blow the whistle, but these people know exactly what to
And
do.
they know exactly what to do. If I'm not there, they still know exactly what to do.
We have a hospital of which we're extremely proud. We have a hospital administrator who has made it that way, helped us to make it that way. You've been here for 12 years, and we certainly hope that you can stay for a long, long time. And we are indebted to you once again, Jim, for having brought to Wadsworth the history of this hospital, which is not very old, but one of these days, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, when people read this, they will wonder, how did this hospital get started? By and large, we will have so many other kinds of improvements in medical care. We talked about the laser, we talked about the MRIs and so forth, that we won't even be thinking about them. But as of today, however, we are at the top of the heap for what we have. We're pleased that you had an opportunity to come back the second time to give us this, and we want to thank you for all of Wadsworth, for what you do, and for what the hospital is for us. Thank you again, Jim.
Thank you very much for having me.